All right, our first speaker, we have the privilege of hearing from Reverend Trey Hammond. He is the pastor, the longtime pastor here of the Mesa Presbyterian Church since 1999. He has served as pastor here. He has also worked on several different justice initiatives throughout his life, including the Urban Ministry Office of the Presbyterian Church USA. He is also the founding president of Heading Home, which operates the Albuquerque Opportunity Center, which houses 100 plus men each and every night. And the Heading Home initiative is a wonderful thing as well, Housing First trip, which maybe we'll learn more about that. But Trey comes to share with us, to kick us off, and so please welcome him as he shares from his heart.
So the Lord be with you. And I'm glad to be here tonight, and I'm glad we're all here to think about what God is doing in the world and in our lives and in the lives of people that we care about. My lecture was, John sort of asked me for a title, and I didn't give him one, so he gave me one. So, called Faith in the Desert. So I know many of you will be talking about sort of the desert as a place for a particular kind of spirituality or theological experience, and that has been true for me. But I'm going to focus my comments a little bit on the work of faith communities in a context like this one, an urban setting. And I'd like to give a little grounding about the background of this community so you can understand a little better. I know that many of you are not necessarily engaged in congregational work like I am, so my lens will be through that, but I hope it relates to your work in community development and intentional community in the way that you are living in urban neighborhoods. This neighborhood that we're in, the La Mesa neighborhood, is a part of the International District. Actually, it used to be called the War Zone, which was a pretty nasty name and not very fair, but it had to do with the crime that was prevalent in this community in the 90s. So names are important, and so there was a real intentional effort to rename this community, and it was called the International Community because this neighborhood is the place where new waves of people come through as they make their way into Albuquerque. It's happened all through its lifetime because there's such a large housing stock of apartment complexes that are affordable. It makes the neighborhood a little bit transient, but it also means it's a very international neighborhood. So over the years, in the 80s, there were Asian influxes of refugees from Laos and Vietnam. And in the 90s, there were Cuban and El Salvadorian refugees that came when those countries were under distress. In the last 20 years, there's been large influx from Mexico and other Central American countries. And so this neighborhood is a fascinating blend of all these cultures, the Hispanic culture, the Asian culture, the African American culture, the Anglo culture, and increasingly refugees from Africa are coming, from some sub-Saharan Africa and from Central Asia, and some now from the Middle East. So when we say International District, it's true, and it's really a part of what makes this neighborhood, I think, so interesting and fascinating. And I think God probably enjoys such a diversity of God's family here. The boundaries of our neighborhood are Central to the south, old Route 66, Lomas to the north, Louisiana to the west, and Wyoming to the east. So that's about a square mile that has about 8,000 residents. Predominantly a Hispanic community at this point. Generally, about half of them are below the poverty level. So it's a neighborhood that's challenged financially. When you look at the school across the street and you look at their demographics, it's pretty telling. 91% of their children are Hispanic, 3% are Native American, 2% Anglo, 1% African American, and there's almost 99% free lunch program at the school for the kids. So That's a part of being in this transient sort of neighborhood that we find ourselves in. The La Mesa Church has been a part of this neighborhood almost from its beginning. Actually, this neighborhood was not actually a suburb at one point. This was a little town, a little village east of Albuquerque. And then when the city began to expand and they built the fairgrounds in the late 1930s, they started annexing more land up here, and they ended up annexing the little town of La Mesa, the little village. So it was its own place before it became a suburb of the city in a sense. Then the city then just grew out from there all the way to the mountains and north. And the exponential growth of Albuquerque is part of its story. In 1920, the city had a population of 15,000. 15,000 in 1920. By 1940, it was up to 34,000. It had essentially doubled. And then in the next 20 years, to the 1960 census, it had gone up to 201,000. It had grown fourfold in those 20 years. And today it's about 560,000 people live in the city. So, and that explosive growth was driven by the automobile, really. I mean, just the growth of highway systems. Old Route 66 used to come through here, then Highway 25 and I-40 became a transit point. And so the city grew. And also then the Sandia Labs, after World War II, was developed south of here, part of the nuclear arms industrial complex, as well as Kirtland Air Force Base. So when this church was founded, it started in the schoolroom at La Mesa Elementary School, and it was just a Bible study. They approached the Presbyterian Church about becoming affiliated there, and the church then moved out onto this facility, the ground that you find it on now, and was actually chartered in 1944. Back then, really, this neighborhood was mostly people who worked at the labs, scientists, engineers, technicians, but then as the demographics of the community changed, those families moved out. And in the 60s, this neighborhood went through a radical racial transition to be predominantly a community of color. And the truth is, oftentimes, churches have a little harder time keeping up with the changes in the neighborhood. And sometimes they don't do very well at all in incorporating new people into their life. So that's part of this church's life. So in 2000, in the 1980s, this congregation had to make an important decision, and they went through a discernment process to discern the calling of God for their future. Were they intended to stay here and do ministry in and with this community, or were they to move, maybe follow where their families were moving out to the north and west of these areas? And that was a very serious process, and I think they prayed long and hard for God's will in the midst of it. And the decision came for them to stay. And people left as a result of that decision, and the financial vitality of the church was impacted, but I think everyone knew it was a faithful decision to stay here and be a part of this community. So they just didn't stay. They then decided they needed to build a space that was more welcoming and open for the neighborhood. So this building was built with this large community hall space, a commercial kitchen, a library, meeting room, and an office space. And so the idea was, if we're going to stay, let's give this community our very best as a congregation. And let's open our doors and let the life of this community pour into this place, and let the life of the faith of this community pour out into the neighborhood around us. When I came, I think one of the reasons I felt called here was exactly that decision. I felt it was a deeply faithful decision by this congregation. And I wanted to be a part of that because my ministry had always been in urban settings. I was a pastor in 3 different congregations in Dallas before I came here. So I've always been interested in how the church can be a catalyst for God's love and for community building in the place that it finds itself. And so, kind of over the years, I've sort of developed what I would call for me a theology of place. And I want to change, I mean, sometimes we tend to think of place in our world as location, right? Location is where you are. You either have a good location or you have a bad location. And that's determined by the criteria of, is it useful to you? Is it utilitarian for you? And the theology of place, I think what we recognize is wherever we find ourselves planted as a church or as a community development corporation or as an intentional community, God does the placing. The place we are given is a God-given, God-directed, God-gifted place. And our work here is to find how God is letting that express itself around us and through us and with us working together to build community. A second notion for me in this theology of place is that we have to serve God in a specific context. And so in my mind, a church like ours has three tasks: to love our neighbors as ourselves, the great commandment; to work for a more just world, because I believe that's what Jesus said he was doing in his first sermon when he says, I've come to preach the good news and the opening of the eyes of the blind and to proclaim the acceptable year of our Lord. And we are to incarnate community wherever we are in a way that's open to the community around us. Thirdly, I really think that sometimes churches and sometimes all institutions, we tend to think that outside, beyond our work, nothing else is going on, right? Beyond the church where we don't know. We have to really be honest and humble about how God is working in this neighborhood in all kinds of ways, like the East Central Ministry, other congregations here, and just people of faith who are living their life out in this place. So, as congregations, we have to be open to what comes our way from the church, as well as what we are called to give to a community. Ministry is a two-way street. And this approach invites us to see this community as a place that's full of gifts and possibilities, of places where God can do great things, not the liability that we have to work around. That's when we begin to see our location as a detriment and not as an opportunity. And fifth, a congregation or a faith community's location does not determine its vitality or its destiny. But it's very important for us to never ignore our context. The more we understand about where we are, I think the more honest and integral our ministries can be. And I think the more seriously a faith community takes its context, its vocation to place, the more exciting and significant its ministry will be over time. So, when I moved to Albuquerque, one of the reasons I love this neighborhood is what's not to like about Albuquerque? It's a city with wild edges, right? There's mountains to the east, there's remnants of volcanoes to the west, there's a river running through it. It's a fantastic environment. We're perched on the edge of the northern edge of the Chihuahuan Desert. It comes all the way up from Mexico. So our countries are united by this landform, this landscape that we share in common. And I've come to understand, I've never really been a person that's been drawn to suburban life or to rural life or small town life. But I love cities and I love wildernesses. I love that contrast. And I've tried to figure out what do these two things have in common that appeals to me. And I think, in addition to my ministry degree, I also have a degree in environmental science. And I study systems ecology. So I'm always sort of looking out the world as looking for systems, looking for ecosystems, looking for the ways that things are joined together and the flows that happen in a community. And I think the reason I like cities and I like the wilderness is because these ecosystems are so fascinating. In an urban setting, you've got an ecosystem that is a tangle of historical and economic and demographic and political relationships and interconnections. And likewise, in a desert wilderness, it's a very complex and durable ecosystem. But if you just want to see it flourish, just add rain. It's already brimming with sunlight and energy and potential life that's just waiting to explode. When we get a rainy season around here, the desert is as green as anything you can imagine. It's gorgeous. And that kind of coming to life, isn't that really what we seek when we serve God? Our coming to life, the people we love coming to life, sharing that life with people around us. Sometimes neighborhoods like this might look a little bit barren, and it's obvious, its deficits are all too obvious. That's why they used to call this the war zone. But if you look deeper, there's always life waiting to emerge, and there are always gifts and assets to be expressed if they can be nurtured and cultivated, if hope and beauty can be planted and watered. And how like in our own life, we're a complex ecosystem ourselves, emotions, our mind, our hearts, our spirit, our body, complicated beings we are, and yet with God's love, what kind of flourishing is possible? We can become more than we ever imagined because that life is in us. It's a life we didn't give ourselves. It's a life we discover as God opens it up to us. So for me, then, as I work in the church, I really think that part of the role of the church as an institution is for it to embody what I would call the reign of God. Jesus used the language, the kingdom of God. That language is a little hard for us in the modern world to grapple with because we're democracies, we're not empires. But what Jesus was saying, I think, is that alongside the empires of this earth, Christ is calling us to realize another empire, another reign. It's driven by a whole different set of ethics than the ethics that drive this world. It's shaped by the Beatitudes and not by the dictates of power. And that is really important as I think about how we work at justice in this world. God's reign in our midst always stands as a judgment to the current arrangement of things in this world. And it holds up a different set of values for us to ask, is this what God intends? Is this humane? Is this loving? Is this compassionate? Is this just? Who's left out? Who gets too much privilege? Those are all the questions of justice that are at the core, to me, of this reign of Christ that we are called to be a part of. So I'm just going to tell a brief story, because I think John wants some storytelling, and I want to see if I can weave together some of the things that I've come to believe true about ministry in a very concrete test case. We just had dinner over at the La Mesa Garden Park across the street. It's not fully bloomed out for the season yet. If you come back here in a couple of months, it's just going to be green as you can imagine. That piece of space was a piece of wilderness land that never got developed. When this neighborhood grew up around this, nothing was ever on that piece of land. It was a blighted, weeded, there was piles of concrete in it. It was just an absolute eyesore in the middle of this neighborhood. And for the longest time, I think many of us had hopes that we might be able to do something with that space that was useful and beautiful and constructive to this community. We found out the city had bought that piece of land because it had gone up for sale. We have a lot of relationships in this community which really very vital to our life. And one of those was with East Central Ministries, and one of those was with La Mesa Elementary School. We partner with La Mesa Elementary School to run an after-school arts academy 2 days a week, where 125 children from the school come over, and they get free art instruction in visual arts, the dance arts, the musical arts, and the dramatic arts. A kid that goes there for 6 years actually has the opportunity to be exposed to about 20 different art classes, which, I don't know about you, but I never got art like that in the school. So it's really an amazing gift, because personally, this part of what's happened to public education with the high stakes testing is that things like art, recreation, and music have slowly been squeezed out of the life of schools because you don't test for those. You do test for other things. And so we saw years ago that La Mesa Elementary got one art teacher for the whole school every other year. And they had to teach half the school for a semester. So that meant every child in that school got one art class every 2 years. Same with music, one music class every 2 years. From my perspective, and this is a strong belief in the Presbyterian Church, that, you know, a child is more than just reading, writing, and arithmetic. You know, a complete child is exposed to music and art, life of the mind, life of the spirit. And so we decided, with working with the school, to create this arts academy. So we have a really tight and close relationship with the school. When we started thinking about having this community space, we were trying to figure out what to do. And John came into the equation at that time, and we were talking about having like a production community garden, really growing lots of vegetables that people in the neighborhood could harvest. John had some experiences working with those, and those are very complicated cooperatives. Anyone ever worked in a cooperative kind of setting? It's hard to keep the energy going and everyone involved. It's just a heck of a lot of work. So we thought, well, maybe we'll do something a little different. Maybe what we could do would be to create a green space and a gathering space in the middle of this neighborhood, and a space that's beautiful, that would have art in it, and a place that would have flower beds, so kids could have like a demonstration garden, and it'd be like an outdoor green classroom. And maybe someday we can have a labyrinth, maybe a little performing arts amphitheater, right here at this intersection between the school and this church, which is it's the most central intersection in this whole neighborhood. And it had been a blighted, ugly piece of land for as long as anybody had ever lived in this neighborhood. I don't know if you've ever heard about the sociological theory called broken windows. Basically, the idea that a window gets broken in your neighborhood and it's still broken a week later, that's an indication that there's not much investment or concern in that neighborhood. And those broken windows increase over time because no one cares. Why should I? On the flip side of that, I think if you add beauty to a community, it may not be the most utilitarian thing in the world to add a garden park in the middle of a neighborhood, but it's beautiful. And it says to the community, somebody's interested in investing here and working hard and planting plants and creating a place for people to have picnics and maybe music and for kids to learn and grow. I don't know how God calculates the value of something like that, but I have to trust. That's part of what we are called to do as people of faith, is to create this kind of beauty and community around us and invite people in so they can be a part of something that's deeply rooted in our faith. So we found that the city owned this piece of land. John talked us out of doing this production garden. John had all the skill to help us create the kind of garden that we wanted to. We worked with another organization that does is kind of a green organization, does water conservation, and we took this just level, ugly piece of land, and we contoured it and put in basins and put in, so we could collect as much water as we could here in the desert whenever it rained. Then ultimately, we were able to get the water line put in so we could irrigate, and the beds that you see are growing. And this spring, the kids will be planting really their first full year of crops in this. And in all of this, and then the city is a partner in this. They leased us the land for 10 years because they weren't going to do anything with it. They were really happy to see somebody investing in the neighborhood. So all of this together has created this beautiful space that we spent some time in tonight. Whenever John's out there, or I'm out there, or someone's out there watering or doing anything, people stop, they honk, they wave, they say, "This is great. Thanks for doing this." To me, in its own way, that's a witness of the compassion and the love of God for this neighborhood and for its people. So I have 5 minutes to go, and I'll just about finish there. So let me say one other thing. Because this community is so multicultural, years ago we used to do a thing called a street festival, because we would want to celebrate all the many cultures in this neighborhood. One day a year, we'd close off the parking lot. We'd have Spanish music and Native American dancing and Asian dancers and African American drummers, and it celebrated our diversity. It was really a terrific event. One year, it never rains here in Albuquerque much, but that year it started to rain on our street festival. So we usually had the performances outside. Well, it started to rain, so we had to push 300 people into this room from the community. And in the middle was this Aztec dance group. They had feathers that were like 20 feet tall, and they were dancing to this very rhythmic drumming, and it was just a powerful cultural experience in this room, and there was incense burning and everything. And I was sitting there thinking, I'm not sure what the elders of the church are going to think about this exactly, because it was wild. It was just. But all of a sudden, then the storm started blowing. We had all the windows open. The wind just blew through this place. That next Sunday, the next day was Pentecost Sunday. That was Pentecost. And a way for this neighborhood, and we all knew it. We all felt it. We all sensed that the Spirit was in this moment, and our sense of gatheredness, and our sense of community. So, I know you're doing that in your various contexts, and I pray you all success in that. And I'd like to close with a poem by Archbishop Oscar Romero, the Salvadorian martyr for his faith. He says that a future not our own. It helps now and then to step back and take a long view. The kingdom is not only beyond our efforts, it's beyond our vision. We accomplish in our lifetimes only a fraction of the magnificent enterprise that is God's work. Nothing we do is complete, which is another way of saying that the kingdom always lies beyond us. No statement says all that can be said. No prayer fully expresses our faith. No confession brings perfection. No pastoral visit brings complete wholeness. No program accomplishes Christ's mission. No set of goals and objectives includes everything. This is what we are about. We plant the seeds that one day will grow. We water the seeds already planted, knowing they hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development, and we provide yeast that produces capabilities beyond all that we can add to it. We cannot do everything, and yet there's a sense of liberation in realizing this. This enables us to do something, and to do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way, an opportunity for the Lord's grace to enter and do the rest.
We may never see the end results. We are prophets of a future that is not our own. Blessings to you all. Thank you.